What's your favorite creepy campfire story? Gosh, let's see if I can recall it correctly. There was a body of a fairly large person, once found in the woods. They were quickly killed, and there was nothing extremely off about the scene, except he had half of his pointer, ring, and pinky finger all missing from his left hand. No one could find the missing fingers, and they never found any clues. A few weeks later, another body was found. Another man who was a bit smaller than the previous guy. Same situation, quickly killed, and 3 fingers missing all from the left hand, and still no clues. A few more weeks went by, and this time it was a woman who was found, smaller than the second guy found, same fingers missing from the same hand. This went on for a while, with the victims getting smaller and smaller, until it was kids' bodies being found. One teenager's body though, only had the ring finger and pinky finger removed. The police found a fingerprint at this crime scene, and they found it matched the prints from a theft record from the previous victim. The guy telling the story then told the kids that the killer was searching to replace his fingers, and so far, he had yet to see if the fingers of children their age would fit. He then took off his glove, showing he had a scarred pointer finger and was missing half his ring and pinky finger, and then lunged at the kids while screaming. He later told the kids he lost the 2 in a work accident, and doctors were able to save his very mangled pointer finger. He told this story every year at camp. So a story I always tell around a campfire that I think is quite spooky is the legend of El Silbon the Whistling Ghost. It's a Venezuelan folktale, but I have a tradition of telling it. Anyway, the legend goes that on cold dark nights in remote places, especially in South America, a whistle can be heard coming down the road. At first it will seem loud, like it's right next to you, but as time passes it begins to fade and get more and more quiet until it's almost gone. The trick is, as El Silbon's whistle gets louder, he's further away, and when he's right next to you the whistle is very faint and sounds like it's far away. Once El Silbon is at your doorstep, he will sit down and begin to count the skulls of his victims, and you have to listen to him count every single skull, or one of your family members will die soon after and become one of his skulls. El Silbon is said to dress like a farmer with a large straw hat, torn clothes, ghostly aura and a pale dead face. It's not that scary, but it's interesting. I remember one that one of my Cub Scout leaders told us on a campout when I was Prop 7. It took place during pioneer times. A man and his wife traveled west in hopes of either striking it rich with gold, or at worst, finding a nice plot of land to settle down on and farm, manifest destiny and whatnot. A few months into their journey they come across just a spot, a beautiful plot of land to make their new home. Winter would be coming in a couple months, so they build a hasty shack and figure they'll hunker down there for the winter, and build a more established house in a few months when the weather is more permitting. They don't worry, as the area is teeming with wildlife for hunting and trapping, so they figure they'll be set for food. A couple of months go by and the winter is bitter cold and unrelenting. They finished off the last of their food stash, and they haven't seen so much as a squirrel in weeks. They're both slowly starving and freezing to death as they huddle in their shack, day after day with no end in sight. The man's wife is delirious with hunger. Fearing that they will soon be dead, he decides to go for a hunt. He musters the energy to bundle up and heads out, determined to stay out as long as it takes to find them both some food. A couple of days pass as the man takes shelter under impromptu stick shelters, keeping warm with a campfire in the nighttime and hunting in the daytime. Nearly frozen to death, mercifully the man spots a beautifully plump rabbit several yards away. He takes aim with his musket and bang, it's a perfect shot. With a newfound energy the man runs home, giddy to finally feast with his wife. What he doesn't know is that while he was gone, his wife had discovered some tasty flesh of her own. Literally, the hunger had driven her insane, causing her to believe that her now frostbitten fingertips were ladyfinger cookies. She started off with a few nibbles here and there, slowly pulling the flesh away from her bones. After just a couple of hours both hands were nothing but bone, so she worked her way up her arms to the elbow. The feeling of something in her stomach just continued to drive her further, until she had chewed away at every last bit of skin she could reach, culminating in her chewing off her own lips. The husband approached the shack with his now frozen kill when he got an uneasy feeling. Fearing the worst, he steps up to the door and slowly opens it, expecting to see his wife's corpse shriveled on the floor. But instead what he finds is even worse. This zombie-like creature with exposed teeth and bones writhing on the floor at the sight of him, chomping its jaws with an insatiable hunger. At that point, One of the scouts screeched for the leader to stop, which I was extremely thankful for, as it was easily the most terrifying thing I had ever heard at the age of 7. The scout leader told it with real conviction too. Honestly, still gives me the creeps if I go camping and happen to think about it sitting around a fire. The golden arm, or at least a version my mom tells. A fellow is looking to be married to one of the rich merchant daughters to gain the fortune that would come with her. Fortunately, the merchant had an unmarried daughter still, so the fellow begins to court her. The first thing he noticed is that she had a solid gold right arm. She apparently lost it in a childhood accident, and her father had a golden arm forged for her. Seeing this as a sign of extreme wealth, he continued with courting her, making her believe he truly loved her and not for her father's money. In turn, she fell deeply in love with him. They get married, and the fellow is given his riches along with part of the merchant business his now father-in-law owned, thus giving him more money. However, he soon realized his wife was now of no real use, so he ignored her, gave her gifts and had dinner with her, but the love he said he felt had disappeared. Angry and heartbroken, the daughter accused him of marrying her for her money, in which he boldly states of course she was furious, screaming about going to tell her father what a scoundrel he truly was and their riches would be stripped away along with his job. This angered the fellow. After all he worked so hard to get to here, he was going to let her take it away. So he pushed her down the cellar stairs and let her snap her neck on the stone. He pleaded heartbroken to the grief-stricken father, losing his most favorite daughter. The fellow riches intact. The fellow and family hold a funeral for the daughter and weep and cry. When it was but him and his dead wife, he opened the casket and pulled out a saw, for she did not need her golden arm in the grave. That night he slept with the arm under his pillow, not wanting even the servants to see it before he melts it down into bars. He slept soundly until a voice like the wind asks, "Where my golden arm?" Slow and far away the voice echoed through the sleeping house, so quiet he thought it was just a draft, until the voice came again, closer and louder this time, as it down the hall. "Where my golden arm?" Sitting up, the fellow looked around fearfully, too scared to do anything, as he hears again much closer, "Where my golden arm?" He felt a heat on his back and a movement from under his pillow, but he was too scared to look away from the door as he hears again, just outside the frame, the wail of "Where my golden arm?" It felt like hellfire on his back as he felt the hot metal of the hand on his back, seemingly crawling on its own as he watches the doorknob turn. The maid found his body that morning, face frozen in horror and hair bright white, hands still clutching the sheets around his body. But the strangest thing was that his dead wife's golden arm was on his chest, hand wrapped tightly around his throat. There were a couple that were, as far as I know, unique to the church camp Gaylor Max and I went to as a kid. Though I admit it's possible some of our stories were ubiquitous ones just adapted to the place, I don't really know. One of them, though, I do have first-hand knowledge about. It's the story of Sydney. The camp was established on an old piece of property that has been a lot of different things over the years. Back during the war, it was a girls' boarding school. One girl who was there was deeply in love with a boy who had gone off to fight. They exchanged letters constantly, until one day the letters stopped coming. Few weeks later, she gets word that her beloved was killed in action. She was so distraught that she hanged herself in her dorm room. There's still a plaque by the door of the room in her memory. Now, I know for a fact that room is haunted. I stayed in that room 1 year when I worked for the camp. One night after lights out, the fan came on by itself. It started spinning faster and faster until it started wobbling really hard, acting like it's about to fall off. I knew the stories, so I shouted, "Stop it, Sydney, I'm a friend." Fan immediately stopped, like not just slowed down and came to an eventual stop. It's like someone grabbed the fan blades and stopped it. There was a Brit who was driving through Ireland as the weather got progressively worse and day soon turned to night. He suddenly realized that he was on the wrong road, but there was nowhere to turn around, so he pressed on, barely able to see the road through the rain. Without warning, his car just died. No battery, no engine. He assumed water must have shorted something and he best start walking. He was soaking wet in 100 yards, but he continued walking. An hour later, he heard a noise behind him and turned to see a car coming very slowly up the road behind him, its lights very dim. As it reaches him, he reaches out through the torrential rain and opens the back door and jumps in. Shocked, He is the only person in the car. There is no one driving and no other passengers. He freezes with fear as the car slowly continues up the road through the pouring rain. Before long a village comes into view and the car creeps silently and slowly into the village. The Brit spies a pub, so he jumps out and runs inside, not looking back. Panting with horror, he orders a beer and sits down. A minute later 2 soaking wet Irishmen come into the pub. The taller one points at the Brit and says that him Paddy, that the bastard I saw jump out of the car we were pushing. I always liked the quick ones. There was a young girl playing in her room one day when she heard a voice that sounded like her mother from the kitchen. "Sweetie, come down here." The little girl jumped up and ran out the door, where she suddenly ran into her mother at the top of the stairs. Her mother reached out and quickly covered the girl's mouth so she could and make a sound. "Don't go down there, I heard it too," she said. Do you have any creepy campfire stories? Share them in the comment section.